themselves. But in that case, if you're increasing the extent of militarization, the checkposts, the checking, the kind of conditions that people live in when they are under military occupation, you're really not going to be able to have a return to normalcy at all. And the outcome of that is, I think just like John Argue said, this is a concern not only for Tamil people in Sri Lanka, it's a concern for all Sri Lankans, because when you have that kind of military culture, extended militarization, a culture of impunity where people in the army and armed forces carry out their own acts against citizens, but also allow all kinds of paramilitary groups to operate, and there is no independent body, no attempt at any kind of accountability, then that's a crisis for all moderate, progressive, justice-minded people in the country, not simply the Tamils, but of course, particularly in these conditions, Tamil people. So I think it is a larger concern, and here I speak not simply as a member of our group, but also as someone who sees that I work on South Asian politics, I come from India, and it is a problem when you have military occupation and you have a culture of impunity and lack of accountability that affects then all people who are innocent people and who get caught up. So I think that people concerned with Sri Lanka, whether Tamil or Sinhala, should be drawn into this, and people concerned with human rights more broadly. Of course, in the long term, our goal as academics is to think about the political solutions and to work with the Tamil community in the Tamil diaspora to think about a political resolution to the conflict and to try and engage with the Canadian government and how they can get involved in this political resolution. But here I think I just want to say how we are thinking about this, which is that as academics we think we have a particular role to play in helping think in some detail about some of the different options that exist. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Karen Parker about the right to self-determination, what that concretely means. But I think, again, we know that it can mean many different things. We know that, for instance, we recognize the right of the Quebec people to self-determination, but it's expressed in a federal constitution in Canada. So how is this right? How can it be concretely expressed? What are the different options? What have the different options been that have been put forward by different groups, whether it was the interim self-governing authority of the LTTE or whether it was the 13th Amendment that was proposed first by India? What do these options concretely mean? And I think that's our particular responsibility as academics, talking to our students and to others in the general public to do some educational work for ourselves. First of all, obviously, we have to learn what all of these things mean, but then talking to students who we feel are very, very engaged, very much want to do something, but right now very much sort of operating out of passion and emotion, and we really want to try and bring some sort of take a step back, get people to sit down, start thinking seriously in a constructive, long-term way about how to approach these different kinds of solutions and what they mean. And I think that's a challenge to us as academics, and I want to throw it out as a challenge, especially to the young people here, to start really thinking in a calm way about some of these kinds of different options, what they might mean. And here I think then the question is, you might have a solution, but how do you get to it politically, and what is the political process of getting to that? And that's why we wanted to emphasize normalcy and restoration of some kind of development process in the North, because in the absence of that, if you have a population that's displaced in camps or under military occupation, you cannot have any kind of real, just, fair solution coming out of them. So you might have elections, you might have a so-called political process being put underway by the government of Sri Lanka, but if people are not empowered to be able to vote freely, to be able to have a variety of options to choose from, you don't know what the outcomes are going to be. And so it's important that there has to be some way in which people have the empowerment to be able to make a choice that really reflects Tamil rights, Tamil autonomy, etc. And in this, it's the question of what the role the diaspora can play and how it can facilitate that empowerment on the part of the people on the ground. What is the relationship? How can they facilitate that? How can they help people think through the different options and give them the strength that they might lack at this time in terms of thinking politically? Finally, I just want to make one point, which is that if we are operating in Canada and our primary mechanism as Canadians is to operate through the Canadian state in some way, the Canadian government, what do we really think is the scope for that in the current context in Sri Lanka? And clearly, it's not, with things like the refusal of visas to an MP or the return, the sort of forcible, disallowing Bob Rae to actually stay in Sri Lanka. It is, clearly the government of Sri Lanka is saying that it doesn't really need to listen to countries like Sri Lanka, like Canada. It's made it very clear that it holds certain countries in displeasure right now. These are the countries that have insisted upon, even though, weekly, have insisted upon certain human rights, observation of humanitarian law and the conduct of war and so on. And so it says it'll turn to, it's fine, it's got the support of China and India. The president of Sri Lanka went to Burma recently to thank the president there for his support. So clearly it's forming its own kind of axis and its own alliances, and this is, so then it means, what do you do if you're you're trying to act through a government that is not actually at this moment able to exert a lot of influence on the government of Sri Lanka. And I think basically what the government of Canada has to do much more is work through international bodies and try and bring some kind of international consensus. And this is where, again, people have to recognize the role of different actors and act both in international bodies and perhaps in other countries, through other countries such as India. Now again, within India, I know that right now the understanding of the government with respect to Sri Lanka is that they see it as a model. So Sri Lanka is being held up as a model for fighting by the Indian government and especially by the Indian army and intelligence as a sort of model for how to fight the war on terror and how to fight counterinsurgency. So there's a growing armed insurrection by the Maoist movements in 5 states in India, and we're seeing more and more this kind of attempt to equate the LTT with the Maoists and say, well, look what Sri Lanka did, and look, therefore, we should be learning from it and applying the same model in India. So countries like India are not at this moment particularly interested, again, in pushing for a human rights agenda or pushing for any kind of humanitarian law, because they have their own reasons also for trying to, in fact, focus on the war on terror, which was how the whole war was prosecuted in Sri Lanka. So again, within that context, it seems that at this moment, really, the emphasis has to be, if one wants to make some kind of headway, the emphasis has to be essentially on the human rights and humanitarian relief for the people in the camps and resettlement, because those at least are those are reasonable requests. Those are not requests that any government should object to, and one should be able to then make some kind of entry through those kinds of requests in order to think about other kinds of issues that are bigger and have to do with such things as prosecution of war crimes, ending the culture of impunity, and of course a political solution, which is ultimately what we're hoping for.